Hey, Dr. Carp here. Welcome to my channel where my goal is for you to become your own authority in health. And today we're going to be discussing carbohydrates and whether you should count, if you're on a ketogenic diet, the net carbs or the total carbohydrates, or if you're just interested in understanding how food labels work. I think you'll be surprised at how they actually work when it comes to carbohydrates. So let's jump right into it and basically understand that when we are talking about carbohydrates, the way it's measured in the lab is basically what's called an indirect measurement. This is the total carbohydrates I'm talking about here, which basically means that they take all the things that are protein, fat, and what's termed ash, which basically means sort of the minerals and maybe whatever else might be in the food, and that's then subtracted, and whatever is left over in a big mass is essentially counted as total carbohydrates. Fiber, on the other hand, is basically measured directly, meaning there is a way of detecting fiber, and then that's actually measured the amount. Now, because both of these tests rely on labs, first of all, we have to realize that the lab measurement for fiber directly is really actually not all that accurate. Total carbohydrates, which I just mentioned, which is basically that indirect subtraction method, is relying on the measurements that are related to protein, fat, and whatever else is in there with the minerals. And so you're relying on a measurement that's based on three other measurements, which means that each time you depend on more than one value, the inaccuracies start to build up. So the total carbohydrate is not all that accurate. It's, pretty good. And the total fiber, which is actually measured directly, is, may or may not be. When you look at it from a lab perspective, it's actually really not all that good of a lab measurement. Now, net carbs, which are generally defined as total carbohydrates minus fiber, because fiber by itself doesn't have a lot of doesn't have a lot of blood sugar, doesn't have any blood sugar impact. It doesn't mean it's not processed. The gut bacteria that you have in your system can use the fiber for certain kinds of fiber for food. That's why things like miracle noodles, which we'll get into in a moment, basically act as a prebiotic fiber, meaning they are digested by your gut microbiome, so it helps your gut microbiome, the bacteria in your gut, to have food to grow, and that means that they are being processed in a sense. But when it comes to blood sugar issues and people on ketogenic diets, etc., it's not really going to have that much of effect. So people are taking total carbs, subtracting the fiber out of that, and then that is what they're using to say, well, this is the carbohydrates. Now, when we get to low carbohydrate foods like miracle noodles, you'll see something interesting on the label. On that label, on most of the plain noodles, you'll see that the total carbohydrates are less than the total fiber. So you might be asking yourself, well, in the general idea and conception of these things, it doesn't make any sense because, well, generally speaking, you're taking away the total fiber from the total carbohydrates to get the net impact, because fiber is considered a carbohydrate. That's why. So how is it possible for you to have a situation where your total carbs on a food label is less than the total fiber? Because on the miracle noodle label, it says 2 grams of fiber, but 1 gram of total carbohydrate. And the reason is when you get to these very low levels of low carbohydrate foods, then you're dealing with a situation where the inaccuracies of these lab tests start to reveal themselves. So in this case, because they're measured in two different ways and the product is so dilute in terms of its carbohydrate and its fiber, even though there are 2 full grams of fiber in a serving, the product itself is 97% water. So you're getting these dilute measurements being done, and you're starting to see the inaccuracies. Now, the inaccuracies are only at this very, very small level. However, if you're on a ketogenic diet, say for seizures, or you are on it for cancer, or one of the medically indicated uses for a ketogenic diet, and you're really concerned about carbs, when you get to these low carbohydrate foods, you have to be careful because you're dealing with inaccuracies of 1 or 2 grams. And that can be something to be worried about. In fact, I was at KetoCon, which is one of the biggest conferences, and I was talking to the guys at Keto Mojo, who they have a blood testing kit, which is really, if you're on a ketogenic diet, you should be doing blood tests, at least at the very beginning. And a lot of people were coming by, getting their blood tested, and they weren't in ketosis, but yet they were eating all these ketogenic, quote, certified foods. And the point is that the very low concentrations of fiber and carbohydrate, when you get to these low carbohydrate foods, you're getting 1 or 2 grams of potential carbohydrates in there just because these things are adding up if you're sampling all these foods. So if you're eating a lot of, quote, low carb, foods, ketogenic diet friendly foods that have 1 or 0 net carbs in there, you should really consider, one, looking at the raw ingredients, and two, if the raw ingredients do have, going to the USDA has a website that will allow you to look at raw food ingredients. They use the same measurements. I might add, most of the time you'll see on, say, a USDA website that it'll mention something about basically, whether it's a direct or indirect measurement. So you'll see that on the website. But when you're looking at these low carbohydrate foods, getting back to that, you really have to look at the natural ingredients, and you have to realize that you're dealing with some inaccuracies, and you're probably getting 1 or 2 grams of some kind of carbohydrate just because you're not getting accurate measurements on the food label. When it comes to sugar alcohols, generally speaking, erythritol and xylitol are okay. Maltitol is not. Splenda, which is I can't remember the sucralose, I think it is. That damages your gut microbiome, so you do have to be careful about that. But otherwise, those sugar alcohols aren't going to have an impact on your blood sugar, but you have to realize that these things are damaging your ability to perceive natural sweetness, which means that your ability to appreciate low sugar foods like blueberries and blackberries are going to be harmed if you're eating a lot of these, artificially sweetened foods, because your palate, it sort of adjusts itself like a thermostat. And if you're constantly challenging it with all these fake artificially sweetened sugars, you're not able to appreciate those sugars anymore. Natural sugars, that is, and natural foods for that matter. So I hope that answers your questions. Please leave comments below. If I get more than one question multiple times, then essentially I'll jump on and make a video like this. Until next time, have a great day.